Welcome back. Chapter 8. Paula pulled the duvet tighter around herself as she listened to the captain's daily briefing out over the tanny. She liked his updates, the little tidbits of information that he spoke about in an authoritative but slightly camp tones. She wondered if Tommy enjoyed them as much as she did. She turned over to face him but found a space in the bed, an indent on the pillow, the only evidence that he had been there at all. Where you at, Tommy? She sighed, stretching as she ran her fingers through her hair. As she did so, she remembered that her appointment at the salon was at 10 o'clock. She dragged herself out of the bed and without looking in the mirror, pushed her hair back and wound it up with a band. She dressed quickly in skinny jeans and a plain black shirt. Tommy? She called his name, but the room was empty. He must have left for the fishing expedition with his new mates. And he ain't leave no note. He ain't shake you and be like, I'm leaving. Whew. She sighed deeply, remembering the days when he would kiss her awake just to tell her he was going to work. It seemed like a long time ago, and vaguely she wondered when it had stopped. It seemed that she spent most of this holiday so far on her own, and weren't they supposed to be having an adult conversation about starting a family? Yeah, y'all supposed to. Maybe it'll be on the last night. Since the night he had presented her with the cruise ticket, it hadn't been mentioned. A horrible thought came to her mind. He hadn't presented her with the tickets. He had distracted her with them. And now he vanished again, off on a deep-sea fishing day trip with his new mates instead of spending time with her, his wife. He never expressed an interest in fishing before, or had he? After all, she hadn't known anything about his apparent passion for astronomy before this trip either. She glanced at her phone on the bed. It was time to swallow her pride. She snatched it up, keyed in a number, and closed her eyes as she waited. When the person on the other end answered, she swallowed audibly. Julie? She said tentatively. Paula? There was a connection there, relief in both women's tone, and have known each other for so long, they both heard it. I'm so sorry, bleated Paula. At the same time, Julia said, I'm so glad you called. There was no need for an apology, though both of them spoke the obligatory words. There was no need for explanation as to what had made them act the way they had. To Paula's relief, they simply picked up where they had left off. I saw your cruise news on Facebook. How's it going out there? Julie asked, her voice muffled. What you're eating? What are you eating? Paula suddenly realized that she wasn't going to have time for breakfast before they went to the salon. She glanced at her watch, saw it was 9:45 already. Breakfast was out today. She would have to have an early lunch instead. Muffins. Went to Starbucks this morning. Without me? She laughed. I miss you, Jules. Me too. But what it's like? Are you freezing yet? As Julia said the words, Paula realized she hadn't been up on deck or out in the open air since they set sail just before her fateful trip to the sauna. She shuddered. Jules, you won't believe this. I went to the sauna and got locked in. Locked in? I thought I was going to die. Expletives and murmurs of sympathy came down the line. Paula settled back against her pillow. She should have called Julia straight after it happened. How did you get out? This woman came along, luckily. She was in there when I first went in. Oh my God, Jules, she was naked. Paula's eyes widened at the memory. She was no prude, but it seemed so totally inappropriate. Ooh, said Julia. Yes. So she came back and luckily let me out. I invited her to dinner with us last night. She's here on her own. Why'd she come back to the sauna? Said Julie. She left her bracelet in there or something. Lucky for me she did. Nobody else was coming along. Oh, and then I lost my bloody bag. I thought it had been stolen from the sauna, but Anna, that's the woman who let me out, found it and returned it. There was silence on the other end of the phone. I know, because I'd be silent too. I'd be like, you still there? Paula asked. Yeah, just, it seems like this woman is your guardian angel or something, said Julia, and Paula noted the careful tone she used. She frowned as she looked at the phone. Was Julie jealous of her new friend? What are you on about? She scoffed. Is she single? Paula nodded. Yes, and skinny as a rake. Seriously, Tommy and I had the most beautiful steak dinner last night, and she only ate half a plate of salad. Careful, sweetie. There are women who make it their life ambition to nab men like your Tommy. Just be on your guard. That's some good advice. Paula felt a flare of irritation, just as she had on the shopping trip. The woman was just one constant lecture. And what was with the continual digs at Tommy, the insinuations that he was going to go off with another woman just because it had happened to Julie? Could Julie and Tommy? She took a deep breath, not wanting to get into another fight with her best friend. She doesn't need to nab Tommy. She's very wealthy herself, got a good career, her own business. So, she's skinny, independent, got her own money. She doesn't sound very desirable at all, replied Julie dryly. She barely even spoke to Tommy. She hung out with me, said Paula defensively. Anyway, I have to go now because she's picking me up soon. We're going to the hair salon together. It's your first full day on the cruise. Where's Tommy? Asked Julie. On a fishing trip with some guys he met. Paula closed her eyes and clutched the phone tight, suddenly unable to listen to the disapproving sound of Julia's silence. Gotta go, babe. I'll call you again. She hung up just as a knock sounded on the suite door. She hurried over, opened it, and greeted Anna, noting as she did the spots of color in the woman's high cheekbones and the thick winter coat she was wearing. Have you been out on deck? She asked. Yes, just waving the boys off on their fishing trip, Anna said. I thought you might be there. Paula frowned. She hadn't been invited to wave them off. She hadn't even known what time they were leaving. How had Anna known? I had a lie-in, she answered lamely. Did Tommy tell you what time they were going? And if so, when? She wondered. They'd not spoken much last night, and she was sure he hadn't mentioned the details of the fishing trip. No, I was just taking a walk up there before our appointment. We're already at Bruges, you know. It was great docking and watching the day trippers speed away on the boats. We're docking again later in Ordorp and picking them up there. Suddenly, it seemed to Paula that Anna knew an awful lot more about her husband's trip than she did. She hadn't even realized the cruise ship would dock to let them off and collect them again later at a different place. The thought of Julia's word of warning and felt something dislodged inside her. Why hadn't Tommy asked her if she'd seen him off this morning? She smiled brightly at Anna, pushing her paranoia deep down inside. After all, if Anna was trying her luck with Tommy, she could have easily gone on a fishing expedition herself. I'll be sure to meet them when they get back, she said as she glanced at her watch. But first, let's get to the salon and get my hair sorted out. She pushing her paranoia deep down inside. Girl, you better take heed of your friend, what your friend is telling you. Put two and two together. Chapter 9. Before. My mother was both a prostitute and a drug addict, or so I was informed on my first day at secondary school. At 11 years old, I knew the basics of sex, but to me, it was what people in their 20s did, not women like my mother. And drugs? I thought of Kevin, our neighbor who sat in his back garden and puffed away on a big white roll-up. The unmistakable scent drifted over the fence, reaching her nostrils as I sat there in all weathers, waiting patiently for my mother to finish up with her customers. That was all I knew of drugs. Funny smelling fags, that weren't such a big deal, seeing as you could smell them practically everywhere you went on my little council estate. The girl who told me what I hadn't known about my mother was called Suzanne. She was a small, wiry, and looked like a ferret. Like me, she was friendless, and looking back, I think now it would have made sense for us to reach out to each other. But in her desperation to be liked, she bullied me. She made her announcement in front of my brand new class before the teacher came into the room. In shock, I said nothing. Instead, I thought about my home, the door to the bedroom that mustn't enter if it were closed, the matches, the ashtray, the peculiar scent that I put down to Kevin next door but often smelled like it was coming from upstairs. I wasn't sure which was worse, my mother, the prostitute, or my mother, the drug addict. The girls in the class, those well-adjusted, well-liked girls like Suzanne and I would never be, jumped on her proclamation. Whore, druggie, slag, skag. Words that started as a whisper were picked up and passed around until the classroom was roaring. She's not, I found my voice at last, and even though it trembled, I said what I was supposed to say. I denied it. Settle down, come on now. The teacher came in, bodies scattered into seats, laughter and pointing looks hung in the stale, sweaty air. From beneath lowered lids, I watched the girls who had called my mother those names. Where's your dad? Hissed Suzanne. Was he one of her punters? Punters. My mother called the men in her room customers. They used to be referred to as her friends, but that had changed since I gotten older. Two different words that meant the same thing. The teacher stood in front of the class, coffee-stained shirt, bright eyes, and unflattering glasses. As he settled in behind his battered desk, he promised us the next few years would be among the best of our lives. He lied. For once, my mother's door was open when I got home, and she was in the kitchen, propped up against the worktop, still in her dressing gown. I watched her for a while, trying to remember the last time I seen her in clothes. My mind worked backwards until I recall her taking me to town at the start of the summer holidays to buy my new school uniforms 6 weeks ago. Mom, I said as I closed the kitchen door behind me. She tipped a fag out of the box and clutched it between her yellow fingers. I waited for her to ask me how my first day at school had gone, but she simply lit her cigarette and continued staring out the window. What are you looking at? I asked, coming up to stand beside her. Nothing, she said. I remained there for a little while, next to her, breathing in the cigarette smoke and trying to ignore her overpowering perfume scent. It was warm in the little kitchen, and I pushed up my sleeves, laying my arms on the cool of the worktop. I waited for her to comment on the scars that crisscrossed my arms and wrists, but she said nothing. Mom, can I ask you about my dad? I held my breath. I never asked her anything like that before. She uttered a laugh as she crushed out the cigarette in the sink. Nope, she said as she pushed herself upright and stretched. Will you put some dinner on while I have a bath? Without waiting for a reply, she sloshed away, her heavy tread on the stairs signaling the end of that particular conversation. There was a girl at my new school who was living an even worse life than me. Her name was Rebecca, and she was dirty and smelly and thin as a rake. I wasn't any of those things because I learned how to use the washing machine when I was 7, and the iron and the shower, and I've been cooking for myself and my mother since I was 8. I took comfort in the fact that Rebecca's story states of affairs were briefly more interesting to the other kids than the fact that my mother was a prostitute and a drug addict. I got a reprieve for a short amount of time. One day, I was sitting outside the nurse's office after having an accident with a scalpel in my art class. I'd given up cutting myself for sympathy, attention, and physical comfort. Turns out, when you're no longer tiny and cute, the teachers and nurses don't give a free hug with every incident that involves a bandage or a plaster. I still cut myself, though, because along with the blood came a feeling of release and relief. It was short-lived, and I tried not to do it often, but the sight of the sharp blade and the anticipation of that blessed emotion had been too tempting that day. The nurse told me I looked pale as she deftly and efficiently patched me up, and I was to sit in the outer office until she was sure I wasn't going to pass out. I waited for her to comment on the faded scars that adorned my arm, but she said nothing. As I perched on the chair thinking of nothing and nobody, then as a rake, Rebecca came in from the corridor. "Mr. Heston told me I was to come here," she said, and it was a moment before I realized she was talking to me. I shrugged. I hadn't summoned her. Why was she telling me? "Rebecca?" It was the nurse, the same one who had bandaged me up. She hurried over to Rebecca and crouched down next to her, put her arms around the thin girl's shoulders and pulling her close. From my corner, I watched in awe and envy. "We're going to ask you some questions," she said, her voice muffled as she spoke into Rebecca's hair. "They might be difficult for you, but it is very important you tell us the truth." They moved as one into the nurse's room, and two official-looking suited women followed them in. Later, just as I was deemed fit to return to class, Rebecca came out with the two women. Her eyes were red, and both of them had their arms around her. "It's okay. You won't ever have to go back to your home again," murmured one. "You'll be staying in a temporary home. The people are very kind, and they're very much looking forward to having you stay." The news was all over the school. Rebecca was being assaulted at home by a man she called Uncle. Many men came and went, apparently, and I couldn't help but think of my own house. I never saw any of my mother's customers. They had no interest in me, or perhaps they didn't even know I existed. I wonder what they would do if they saw me when they had finished with my mother. Might they take an interest in me, an unhealthy interest like the uncle had with Rebecca? Would I then be summoned to the office and treated with tenderness and kindness and put in a home where people were nice to me? It was a thought that would stick with me. There were tears, crocodile's ones mostly, from the girls who had shamed Rebecca for the way she looked and the way she smelled. But all I felt was envy. She had been rescued and was moving to a home where only love and kindness and care were waiting for her. That's the end of chapter 9. Okay. Everybody got a story, right? Chapter 10. Paula leaned her head back against the sink and signed with pleasure. Across the salon, she could hear Anna's soft voice as she spoke to the stylist. She wondered what Anna was going to have done. Her hair was already short, shaved up the sides longer on the top, an out there style that Paula would never have been able to carry off. But she had to admit that with Anna's petite and boyish frame, it looked very high-ended. The woman had no roots to speak of either. "We're going to leave the condition on for around 30 minutes, said the stylist as she massaged Paula's head. "Great idea. Reverse some of the heat damage from the from the sauna," murmured Anna. She sounded very close. Oh my goodness, Anna is close. I thought it was the stylist. It's Anna, y'all. She sounded very close, and Paula opened her eyes, closing them again as the conditioner flicked across her eyelids. Excuse me. She felt Anna's hand then on her shoulder, and she relaxed. "What are you getting done, Anna?" she asked, wincing as the woman behind her tugged at her tangled hair. Just a trim. I was thinking of highlights, but I think I like it how it is at the moment," replied Anna. The salon phone began to ring, and the stylist's hand stilled in Paula's hair. Excuse me. "Are you all right if I just get that?" Hold on. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. She asked. Paula waved her away. "I hate that," she said in a low voice to Anna, "when some stylists have to double up as receptionists." She paused and gave an awkward laugh. "Do I sound like a snob?" "No. It's a particular bugbear of mine, too, replied Anna. I mean, we pay enough money for them to hire someone to answer the phone, right? Yes, Paula smiled and settled back against the basin. Hey, do you want to get an early lunch when we're done here? Miss Massey? A second hairdresser came into the salon with a bright smile. She summoned Anna over. I'm ready for you now. 30 minutes later, Paula's stomach rumbled noisily as the stylist unwrapped the cling film from around her head. She looked over at Anna, realizing the other woman hadn't answered her question about lunch. She opened her mouth to inquire again, but clamped it closed as she ran her eyes over Anna's impossibly skinny body. She had barely touched her salad last night. What if she had an eating disorder? Would it be horribly insensitive to keep on inviting her to meals? What are your plans for the rest of the day, Anna? She asked. Anna shrugged. I think we're stopping for a couple of hours when we dock to pick up the men. I might get off. Have a look around. Paula nodded. Clearly, Anna was planning to be there when the men boarded. Was she intended on picking one of them up? Julie's warning rang in her mind again. Was she going to be there in the hope of bumping into Tommy in particular? Murder! Paula didn't understand the language, didn't even know what nationality her stylist was, but she got the tone. What? She asked. She looked up and around at the other woman. The stylist's face had drained of color. What? Paula asked again. She reached behind her, pulling her hair over her shoulders and peering down at it. Oh my God, she muttered. Looking back up at the stylist, she held up the strands of hair. What happened? What is it? Anna's voice floated across the salon. Paula couldn't speak. It's hair, just hair. It's not your health. It's not death. It's just hair, she told herself. But it wasn't, not really. Anna's gown whispered as she crowded around with the other two stylists. Paula heard a gasp, long drawn out, and she felt the hairdresser's fear in their silence. Is this bleach? Asked Anna sharply, lifting a hand to pat at Paula's hair. The look in her eyes was of sympathy mixed with horror. Despite the two hairdressers talking in crisp tone at each other, gesturing to the dish that had been used for the deep conditioning treatment, Paula did not ask again what had happened. She did not demand that it be put right, that she received a refund and further complimentary treatments, or insist that she speak to a manager of the salon. There was nothing that could fix this in the here and now. Just dry it, she said, her voice thick. In the mirror, she watched the three women behind her exchange worried glances. She heard her own breathing accelerate. Suddenly feeling very constricted, she pulled at the neck of the gown that covered her. The Velcro peeled away and she stood up, leaving the gown on her chair. Forget it, she said in a strange, strangling voice. And as the others watched, she hurried to the door of the salon and pushed through it. In the corridor, she paused, one hand on the wall, and was in her imagination. Wait a minute. In the corridor, she paused, one hand on the wall. And was it her imagination, or were the walls closing in on her? She heard the click of heels approaching from inside the salon, and she pushed off the wall, darted through a door, up the winding stairs, feeling dizzier and fainter as she went around and up and around. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a door large and metal as she pushed on it and burst through. The wind, howling and bitter, made her gasp, and belatedly she realized she was out in what must be minus temperature and a thin top with no coat. She wrapped her arms around herself and put her head down against the wind, made her way to the railing. Girl, I know you ain't about to jump. Eyes stinging, she forced her head up and looked to the sky. It was a metallic gray with dark swollen clouds, fat raindrops cascading around her, stinging her skin and soaking her already wet hair. Her hair. She caught a fistful of it and peered sideways. It was bleached. She knew instantly. Anna had been right. That wouldn't have been so bad had she been blind, but the mixture had turned her glossy black hair a garish orange color. And not all over, which might also have been a little bit better, but in splotches. How had the bleach gotten into the dish? Had it been left over from a previous customer? It didn't matter anyway, she thought, as she tilted her head back and let the rain lash down to wrench the horrid mixture from her hair. There was no changing it. She put a hand on the cold railing and stared out to the sea, hoping to catch a glimpse of Tommy returning from his adventure, but there was no sign of life on the choppy ocean. It stretched dark and barren and empty all the way to the horizons. Ooh. Anna stood in the reception and tapped her nails on the counter. Behind the desk, the stylist who had worked on Paula's hair stared at her, a troubled expression on her face. "She's your friend, no?" she asked in a low murmur. Anna shrugged. "Not really. I just met her yesterday." The stylist nodded and lowered her eyes. Anna let the silence stretch on. "I don't understand how it happened," the hairdresser said, her voice a thin, painful whisper now. Anna said nothing, wondering what the woman expected in a response. Platitudes? Sympathy? Finally, the stylist stabbed at the computer till and pushed a receipt across the desk. "It was very upsetting to witness," said Anna without glancing at her bill. A single moment, then the stylist flushed a deep red. She picked up the receipt and screwed it up, dropping it into the bin. With a small smirk, Anna nodded to her and made her way out of the salon. In the elevator, she pushed the button for the top deck and, holding her shoulder bag close, watched as the numbers ticked off. The deck was deserted when she pushed through the heavy door. She didn't notice the sting of the wind and the rain as she walked briskly to the rail. From her bag, she pulled out the bottle. Ooh! She pulled out the bottle of hydrogen peroxide and ammonia. I hope that Paula is still there and see her do it. She shook it once, and the milky white dregs glowed bright against the gloom of the day. Then, pulling her arm back, she threw it as far as she could overboard. There was no splash. The bottle bobbed for a moment and sank in the white plummet waves to vanish forever in the trail of the fast-moving ship. Anna is treacherous, child. Child. At lunchtime, Anna gave into her body and ate a small bowl of soup. She spooned it mechanically, taking no pleasure from the flavor. Food meant little to her. It was a chore that she had to succumb to on occasions to keep her strength up. At times, as well as the lightheadedness, she experienced other symptoms. I've been wondering about that. Could she be pregnant? Colors, vivid flashes of green and blues affected her vision, along with a dense headache. She found the flashes diverting. She imagined the northern lights would look similar if she were ever lucky enough to see them. As she pushed her discarded bread roll to one side and sipped at her cup of water, she heard a commotion in the doorway. She looked up and sat a little straighter when she saw the fishing expedition boys come piling through the door, headed by Tommy Ellis. The dining area was empty but for her, and he held a hearty greeting as he made his way over to her. Anna sat back and crossed her legs. "You boys are back early," she remarked. "We had to turn around. Have you been on deck?" "It's wild out there," said Tommy, as he pulled out a chair uninvited and sat down. "Drink, mate?" asked one of his fishing buddies. "A pint, please," said Tommy. He glanced at Anna's water. "Anna, She pretended to mull over it. Gin and tonic, thanks, she replied. Tommy pulled off his jacket and slung it on an empty chair. How were your salon appointments? He asked. He had the nerve to ask her, but he asked, and before she could answer, he reached a hand towards her face. The hell? For a second, she thought he might touch her hair, and she held her breath, but his fingers stopped just short of her. Looking good, he said, and the roughness of his voice had gone, to be replaced by a softness she would never have thought he possessed. Girl, you don't even know him. Good, thanks. Paula had a problem, though. His pint landed in front of him, and a heavy hand shoved a gin and tonic towards her. She barely glanced at the man as she murmured her thanks. Tommy took a long sip. What problem? He asked. She shrugged. Something wrong with the conditioner they use. It might have been a color or something. She shrugged, allowing her oversized jumper to slip deliberately off of one thin, tan shoulder. How's that a problem? He asked, his eyes traveling to the bare patch of skin. I'm sure it looked okay, didn't it? I don't know. Anna lowered her eyes. She stormed out, and I haven't seen her since. Tommy's face fell, and she knew she had got across what she wanted, that Paula had had a tantrum, that she was hiding somewhere on the ship in a sulk. I'm sorry, he said, an apology on behalf of his wife. Interesting. She smiled at him. It's not your fault, is it? He ran his large hand over his closely cropped hair. Nah, but she can be a bit. He trailed off helplessly. Anna debated whether to cover his hand with hers or offer sympathy. All the while, the unspoken words that she would never behave that way would hover between them. But no, she decided it was too soon. He pushed back his chair half-heartedly. I should track her down, finally, he said, though he remained seated. Anna took a long swallow of her drink and crossed her legs. I think she wants to be alone. She'll probably want to sort out her hair. She leaned forward, presenting him with an eyeful of her braless chest inside the deep neckline. Why don't you give her a few hours, then text her to come along for dinner? We can all eat together again, yes? For the first time, she acknowledged the other men who had taken seats at their table. In the meantime, you can all regale me with your morning adventures. The wind had picked up to what seemed like gale force when Paula finally peeled herself off the railing and walked slowly back inside. She was numb from her head to her toes, and the deep freeze had settled in the very marrow of her bones. Girl, you about to be sick. In the elevator, she held her hands up in front of her face and clenched her fingers. Sharp pain shot through her knuckles, and she grasped as she looked closer at the split skin. With a barely concealed sob, she shoved her hands in her pocket. Wait a minute, making sure I'm on the right. In her pockets, okay. The elevator door opened to a hive of activity, and she looked around in confusion. She had ended up in the bar and dining area, and her stomach rumbled noisily, reminding her that she had missed both breakfast and the early lunch she had planned after the hair appointment. But it was too close to dinner to eat something now, and catching sight of herself in the mirror walls, she shuddered and retreated into the lift. She had never looked so awful. She turned away, but not before she had caught sight of her hair, still wet, tangled, and with those awful pale bleach patterns. She felt tears well up again at the sight of the people already congregating for dinner, laughing and drinking. She blinked. Tommy and Anna sitting together, their faces close. Anna threw her head back to laugh at something Tommy said. When had he got back? And why was he with her? She slammed a hand on the panel to stop the door closing, but they swished shut, and with an efficient hiss, the elevator swept upwards. He had texted her. She saw as she closed the door of the suite behind her and picked up her phone. We're all in the restaurant. We're eating with the fishing boys tonight at the trip as the trip got cut short. Anna is already here. Come down as soon as you're ready. She sank down on the bed, tapping her fingers thoughtfully on the screen. It was more information than she usually got from him in a text, and it seemed to explain why he was already back. And he acknowledged that Anna was with him. Didn't try to hide it, not like some men would have. She tapped out a reply. Give me 20 minutes. Pressing send, she threw the phone on the bed and hurried into the bathroom. Taking a deep breath, she studied her reflection. There was no salvaging her hair, except in a flash of inspiration, she upended her makeup bag into the sink, scrabbling among the various items until she found what she was looking for: hair mascara. A few months ago, she had found a singular errant gray hair. In a state of panic, she had plucked it out and immediately raced to the shops. She couldn't put a color on. That was done by her very expensive stylist, and she wasn't due an appointment for another 4 weeks. If gray hairs were going to start prematurely springing up, she needed something on hand for immediate use. As luck would have it, no more gray hairs had appeared, and now she had a full tube of jet black hair covering. It wouldn't do long term, she noted as she scraped the wand over the worst of the blotches. Tomorrow, she would go back to the salon as soon as they opened and demand that they fix the mess they had made of her hair. And she would go alone. She paused mid-stroke, wondering why she had thought that. It was hardly Anna's fault that the hairdresser had messed up. Girl. She dashed the thought away and scrutinized her reflection. Perhaps the stylist could lighten her hair all over so that the orange bits blended in. She put the mascara wand down carefully on the edges of the sink and shook her hair out. She'd never been a blonde, and weren't they supposed to have more fun? She thought of Anna. She tossed her tousled, sun-kissed hair flying around as she laughed with Tommy and shivered. When had Paula last laughed like that with him? They had certainly laughed a lot at the beginning of their relationship when they were both students, when nothing seemed very important and life was all about fun. Then came jobs and responsibility, new houses and mortgages, and even though they were the most financially comfortable they had ever been, there didn't seem to be much to laugh about these days. She missed the way they used to be. She realized that so far they had spent barely any time together on this holiday. They were supposed to be making a baby, and yet he hadn't even come near her. Once again, she thought of him downstairs with his fishing buddies and Anna. After dinner, they would come back to the suite, she vowed. They would spend the evening in bed, and she would even open a bottle of champagne. And later, they would sit in a big chair in front of the French windows and watch the stars, and if they were really lucky, the northern lights. There was something different about Paula as she made her way out of the elevator and raised her hand as she spotted them. Anna tilted her head as she studied her. The hair. It was Paula's normal glossy black hair. Had she returned to the salon? But no, there was no way they would have been able to repair the bleach damage in such a short space of time. Tommy, previously attentive to Anna, saw his wife approaching, and Anna watched, increasingly disconcerted, as he smiled wide and happy. He raised his hand, bellowed out for Paula to come over. When she arrived, he stood up and kissed her cheek. Oh, the first time he showed some affection to her. You look great, he said. Where you've been? Anna said there was a problem at the salon. Anna reached out a hand and touched Paula's fingers, mustering up the enthusiasm to sound friendly. It looks great, she said. Did they sort you out? Paula fixed a smile on her face. I'm going back at some point, but it's okay for now, she replied. She turned to Tommy, her back to Anna now. How come you're here? What happened to your trip? With his arms around his wife's shoulder, he pulled her down to sit next to him. As he repeated his story of the wild seas and the torrential wind and rain, Anna sat back in her own chair. It was all very civilized, and she was still at their table. But somehow it was as though she had lost. Husband and wife talked quietly together, their heads closed, looking just like he and Anna had done all afternoon. Resigned, she came to the conclusion that it was over for today, but just for one day. Tomorrow she would start again. Ooh, heifer. She murmured some excuse to the remaining few men who had been on Tommy's day trip with him and stood up, walking briskly away from the table towards the elevator. As she waited for it to arrive, she watched the couple carefully. Maybe it was time to step things up a bit. Oh my God, what is this woman about to do? As Anna made her way up and out onto the top deck, she thought about Tommy Ellis. He was easy on the eye, fit and strong, and as long as he was talking about something that interested him, he was a good conversationalist. But all of those plus points were irrelevant. He was a man with a home and a very good financial security. He had no children who would lay claim to his inheritance. He had no siblings, no dependents. Soon he would be a widower. It was such a simple idea. It wasn't that much different from what she had planned with William, though that had ended sooner than she had banked on because of his son. If Jason hadn't suddenly appeared, Anna would have spent a good few more years squirreling away William's money, ciphering transactions here and there, laying a base plan for her own survival so that she never had to go back to the way her life had once been. And that was why she had changed tack. Once Tommy was on his own, there would be nobody to stop her. No son or daughter swooping in to take care of their dad. There was only one snag. He needed to think less of his wife. She had seen it at the beginning, the tension that simmered between them, the discord, the niggles. She needed to widen that gap to dislike and distaste. She thought she had been succeeding. Only tonight, when Paula had arrived for dinner, Tommy had looked at his wife with something that was almost a new love. It wouldn't do. It wouldn't do at all. She walked to the side of the ship, rested her hand on a narrow gate set into the railing. Spotting a bolt at the bottom, she reached down and slid it back, then pushed on the gate. It opened easily, and she stood in the gap. Just one step forward, and she would be below in the waves, no hope of survival. She closed and bolted it again, then cast a glance around her to make sure nobody had witnessed what she had just done. Why on earth would the gate be there in the first place? She resolved to ask the captain when it was her turn to dine at his table. Shivering now, she made her way back along the deck toward the inner corridor. At the door, she paused and looked up at the night sky. It was cloudy, the sky threatening rain again. There would be no chance of any sighting of the northern lights tonight. Just then, the door swung open and a crew member stumbled out, colliding with her. "Oh, miss, I'm so sorry," he said, wiping his hand behind his back. She caught the scent of a hand-rolled tobacco, saw the smoke that swirled up behind him. She smiled. "I had exactly the same idea," she said, "but I left my smokes in my suite." He gave her a lopsided grin. "Suite?" he asked. "Not a cabin?" "The Arctic suite," she confirmed. "Pretty big for one person." "I know, but hey," she smiled, raising her eyebrows. Hoped he got the message. He leaned against the wall as he offered her a pre-made roll-up. She accepted it, bending forward as he cupped his hand around it to light it. "What's your name?" she asked. "Mark," he replied, "at your service." She nodded to herself. A man other than Tommy wasn't in her plan for this cruise, but men were generally stupid, led by their lower half, and this Mark might come in handy. She studied the insignia on his thick woolen coat. 3 stripes meant he was at the high end of the staff scale. Her mind turned over. He would have access to cabins, the master key of all suites. He would come in useful, very useful indeed. Mark, what is the gate for in the middle of the railings down there? She asked. He dragged deeply on his own cigarette and looked to where she gestured. There are several of them. They're for the lifeboats. In the event of an emergency, we can just open the gates and crane them out. See where they're stored? Behind those panels there. And the metal joints they're attached to? He pointed with his cigarette and shrugged. It's a time saver. She nodded and moved a little closer to him. Isn't it dangerous? She asked. A kid could come along and open one and fall into the sea. He smiled, a patronizing smile, she thought, slightly irritating, but she waited patiently for his reply. Nah, they're padlocked, he said. Only crew members can open them. One of them isn't, she thought, but she wasn't about to tell him that. It's my day off tomorrow, he said. Maybe you like a tour of the ship. She smiled. He was hooked. Within an hour and a half, Mark was in the Arctic suite, naked and on top of Anna in the enormous bed, an almost empty bottle of champagne clutched in one hand, a lit cigarette dangling from his lips. Anna counted silently inside her head. For her, sex, much like food, was something to be endured, an act that was sometimes necessary, but from which she derived no pleasure. As Mark finished and let the champagne bottle drop from his hand to the floor, he muttered something into the pillow, words she didn't catch, then shifted position and closed his eyes. She plucked the cigarette from between his lips and placed it in her own mouth. Within minutes, he was snoring loudly. She slipped from the bed, and as she walked to the bathroom, she picked up the keys from where he had carelessly tossed them as he divested himself of his clothes. In the bathroom, she turned the shower on and laid the bunch of keys on the floor. She identified the padlock keys easily, the ones that would open the gates and the railing. She moved past them. The gate she had her eyes on was already unlocked. No, it was the master keys she was after, the one Mark had shown her earlier. Unlike the credit card type keys the passenger used, the masters were actually keys. 4 of them in all, and she located the one that locked and unlocked the suites. She slipped it off and put it in the pocket of her robe. As an afterthought, she pulled off the key for the public restrooms. When she went back into the bathroom, she put the keys carefully back next to Mark's coat. On the bed, he slept on. Tonight, fellow passengers, may prove a lucky night, as the forecast is clearer than previous evenings. Not only do you have the chance to see the promised northern lights, but also shooting stars from Leonids, as well as the waxing gibbous moon, cloud covered permitting. So, midnight walkers, make sure you look up to the skies if you are taking a late night stroll on the upper deck, and keep your eyes open for some unexpected surprises. And that's the end of chapter 10. Ooh, so remember the prologue? And somebody was stuck under the ice? Is somebody going to die on this cruise? Who? It got to be a female, right? So it's either Anna or Paula, right? And do it seem like Tommy is feeling his wife? Ooh, excuse me. And what turn of events, what would have caused that turn of events of him, disregarding Anna? Did he peep Anna, game? And he was like, no, I ain't going to do that. I'm going to give some attention to my wife. And is it really that easy to talk to somebody? I mean, people who work on cruise talking to people like that, I thought they should have been like a little bit more cautious of people asking questions like that. But she got a key. I don't know what's about to go down. But we shall see. Paula, you got to start thinking with your head, child. And Anna think that he not going to have any, children. But if tonight him and Paula get to, and she possibly might be pregnant, get pregnant, then they go a kid. Anna. I don't know what to say, but that's the end of this chapter. I'm going to see you in the next chapters. Bye for now.